Good morning to all of you here on a nice, beautiful morning in the sunny People's Republic of Berkeley. Welcome to our summit, Science for Parks, Parks for Science, the Next Century. And welcome to all of you who are watching on live stream. My name is Steve Beissinger. I'm a professor of conservation biology here at UC Berkeley in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management and the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology. And I'm very excited to kick off this summit today. We are talking this morning, in this morning's session, with an outstanding set of speakers who will inform us a bit about the relevancy and mission of parks and protected areas, both on land and in the ocean. We want to also know, what's the national park idea like around the world? How have we seen this grow over the last century? We'll be celebrating the centennial of our national parks in 2016. What are the role of parks in biodiversity protection? And will national parks continue to be relevant to American people as urbanization increases and disassociates people from nature? So the plenary sessions are designed to have visionary talks with significant time available for question and answer. We'll have two ways for you to submit your questions. You can send your questions anytime via email at the address science4parks@berkeley.edu. That's science with the number 4 and the word parks all together at berkeley.edu. And Berkeley has 3 E's in it. Or you can write them down on yellow note cards that'll be passed around, and runners will bring them up. We have a set of crack graduate students who have been practicing this technology and developing some interesting questions this semester, working on the questions about national parks. I can tell you that short questions are a lot more likely to make it through the queue than our long questions. So please try and keep them brief. That doesn't mean that the answers will be brief. It's my pleasure now to introduce to you our first plenary speaker, Edward O. Wilson. How do you introduce the world's foremost living biologist? Been thinking about this. I could probably just say, introducing E.O. Wilson, and you would all know something about the man that we've asked to launch this summit. If you're an ecologist, you'd probably think of island biogeography. If you're an evolutionary biologist, you'd probably think about sociobiology. If you're a conservation biologist, you'd think biodiversity. And if you're an entomologist, well, I think you'd think ants. Ed Wilson made seminal contributions to these scientific disciplines and, at the same time, wrote books that captivated the general public. 2 of his books won Pulitzer Prizes for nonfiction, The Ants and On Human Nature. But The Naturalist might be my favorite, and it's a must-read for any young scientist. Professor Wilson has received more than 100 awards, including the U.S. National Medal of Science and the Crayford Prize of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. I decided to skip the other 98 in hopes that we could move on and actually hear from Professor Wilson. Now he uses his E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation to foster stewardship of our world through biodiversity research and education. But you probably knew all of that. What you may not have known is that this is Professor Wilson's first visit to Berkeley since the early 1970s. And when I timidly approached him to ask him to be the lead speaker of the summit, he replied that he enthusiastically accepted our invitation to what he called this historic event because it encapsulated his life's work. To talk about his life's work today, setting aside half the world for the rest of life, I give you Professor E.O. Wilson. Thank you. Thank you very much. Make sure we got you comfortable.
All right, fine. I'm going to remain seated, not out of disrespect to this wonderful audience, but because my knees are getting a little wobbly. Professor Beissinger, Steve, comrades, friends, the future, members of the future of the planet, thank you for having me here. This is a historic event that we're having this week. I'm grateful to be allowed to be part of it. I'm going to begin by summarizing what scientists have learned about biodiversity and extinction, especially during the past 20 years of fast-moving research. Then I'll suggest what I believe is the only viable solution to staunch the continuing high and growing rate of species extinction around the world. And finally, I'll make the point that I believe is already obvious to those of you here gathered who have any experience or have acquired information on our present biodiversity, the status of our present biodiversity, that our national parks, our parks generally, but especially our national parks in this country, are logical centers for both scientific research and education, for many domains of science, but especially and critically for biodiversity and conservation of the living part of the environment. Now, the world is turning green, pastel green, but humanity's focus remains on the physical environment. You may have noted on pollution, shortage of fresh water, especially here in California. I wish you the best for the next 5 years. The shrinkage of arable land, and on that great wrathful demon, climate change. In contrast, Earth's biodiversity and the wildlands in which biodiversity is concentrated have continued to receive relatively little attention. This is a huge strategic mistake. Consider then what I would like to have as a kind of mantra or rule to sum this up about humanity's environmental responsibility. If we save the living environment of Earth, we'll also save the physical non-living environment because each depends intimately on the other. But if we save only the physical environment, which we seem worldwide bent to doing, we're going to lose them both. So, what is the condition of the living environment, in particular its diversity and stability? How are we handling this critical element of Earth's sustainability and our own future as a species? Let me summarize the basic information in a time that, in fact, I hope I will be able to say it in a fairly short period of time. The scientists have assembled to the present moment, much of it published only during the past 10 years. First, what is biodiversity? That will be, Professor Beissinger tells me on the final exam. What is biodiversity? It's the collectivity of all inherited variation in any given place you select to sample that can be delimited, whether a vacant lot in a city, an island in the Pacific, or the entire planet. Biodiversity, as many of you will of course know, consists of 3 levels. An ecosystem such as the pond, a forest patch, a coral reef, and then next down in the hierarchy that compose biodiversity are the species composing each ecosystem, and finally, at the base, the genes that prescribe the traits that define the species that compose the living part of the ecosystems. Now, how many species are known in the whole world? How much biodiversity is there? At the present time, almost exactly 2 million are known. How many are there actually out there, known and unknown? Excluding bacteria, and the archaea, the two prokaryotic microorganisms I like to call the dark matter of biology, because so little is known about them. And let me give students advice. It won't even be for entomology, but for the bigger subject, that if you're picking a group to work on and where your expertise will move you fastest, then be a microbiologist. Any rate, so little is known of that part of biodiversity. We'll include them. The best estimate of biodiversity, of the amount of biodiversity in the remainder, that is the fungi, algae, plants, and animals, is about 8 to 10 million species, give or take, or a million. Think about that. In other words, a little over 250 years since Linnaeus began the process of exploring the biodiversity of the world and introduced the binomial system of binomial nomenclature, we still have somewhere in the vicinity of something like 80% of the species remaining to be discovered, not including the prokaryotes. Except for the big mammals, the vertebrates, comprising 63,000 known species collectively of mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians, plus about 270,000 species of flowering plants known globally, very little to nothing is known of the remaining millions of kinds of fungi, algae, and invertebrates. These are the foundation of the biosphere. They are also the most neglected little things that run the earth for us. To put the whole matter in a nutshell, we live on a little known planet. We have only begun, basically, the Linnaean enterprise of exploring the biodiversity of the world. At the present rate of elementary exploration, that is, finding, diagnosing, and giving a defining Latin name, at the present rate, which is about 18,000 new species described a year, biologists will complete a census of the world's biodiversity sometime in the 23rd century. That has to be speeded up dramatically, otherwise we are going to be flying almost completely blind in the finer and farther reaches of conservation biology and practice. Complete censuses have been undertaken to the present time in only 3 national parks in the world of which I am aware: the Great Smokies Mountain National Park, the Boston Harbor National Park and Recreation Area, and the one with I've been closely defined over the last few years, or affiliated, the Gorongosa National Park of Mozambique. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most advanced, with 50,000 hours of field work by experts and by assistants completed. About 18,000 species have been recorded as living there, and with a rough estimate of 40,000 to 60,000 species considered likely, when all of the transients, all of the very rare and not yet discovered species, and all those unfound or not found and undescribed have been registered, fewer than 1%, let me repeat that, fewer than 1% of that, and that would be a typical census for a national park, of the species have been studied beyond this first roll call, getting their name on the list. Incidentally, to include something very dear to me, the largest amount of biodiversity by far in a North American park is, or would be, the one under consideration for the Mobile, Alabama Delta and the Red Hills and the rivers immediately to its north. It harbors, for example, and we're quite along in advance, and I'm from that part of the country, very far along in advancing the proposal for it. It harbors, for example, 24 species of oaks. Now, 14 species have been found in the southern Appalachians, which are generally considered, or have been up to this time, the headquarters of oak biodiversity in North America. They have 24 there, and on and on. In fact, with the adjacent central Gulf Coast plains, that park, if created, would have the largest number of turtle species in the world. It is rivaled only by the Mekong Delta, and so on. Fishes into the hundreds of species. Now, turning next to the extinction rate. What is the extinction rate globally? With the data sets of the best known vertebrate animal species, and with additional information from paleontology and genetics, we can put the extinction rate now occurring to the closest power of 10, that is order of magnitude, 1,000 times greater than the extinction rate that existed before the coming of humans, closest to 1,000 times. For example, from 1895 to 2006, 57 freshwater fish species and distinct geographic subspecies were driven to extinction in the United States by human activity. These extinctions have removed approximately 10% of the total species alive in North America. This means that the rate of fish species has been calculated as just under an estimated 900 times the level of species extinction, rate of species extinction, before the coming of humans. This brings us then to the effectiveness of the global conservation movement, a great contribution to world culture pioneered by the United States. The global conservation movement has aroused public awareness. It has stimulated a great deal of research. But what has it accomplished in saving species, hence biodiversity? Now, this is something you should know when you're challenged by your Republican friends. Are anyone present? Okay, anyway, I know I'm at Berkeley. Anyway, the answer, what has it actually accomplished? We need to have the numbers. How well are we doing? The answer from data on the vertebrates, we know enough about the vertebrates to actually derive something like this, is that the global conservation movement has slowed the rate of species extinction, but is still nowhere close to stopping it. A study made by experts on different groups of land vertebrates, species by species analysis, found that the rate in these most favored groups, notice I didn't include the freshwater fish, these are land vertebrates, has been cut by 1/5, according to group, to 1/5 to 1/2 by conservation efforts worldwide. Furthermore, the Endangered Species Act, pardon me, by focusing on recognized endangered vertebrates in the United States, since they are armed with legal procedures and with actions designed for each species in turn, has brought 10 times more species back to health that have come under the Endangered Species Act, 10 times more than have been lost to extinction. But they are, our American species are a very elite group, and have therefore, we've done better, especially in the case of the birds, where worldwide the rate of extinction has brought through, it's been successful by about 50%. Nevertheless, the species, and with them, the whole of biodiversity continues to hemorrhage. The prospects for the rest of this century are grim for the living environment. Everyone here, as I'm sure, knows about the 2C threshold. 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 Fahrenheit, the increase in the ground average temperature global, above which the planet is going to enter a much more dangerous regime of climate change. What is not well known or talked about is, in fact, it's not even well known among scientists, I think, is that a parallel circumstance exists in the living world, the living part of the world. Earth is at or approaching right now a rate of 1,000 times above pre-human levels, and the rate is accelerating. Repeat, accelerating. Somewhere between 1,000 times and 10,000 times, Earth's natural ecosystems will reach the equivalent of the 2C global warming threshold and begin to truly disintegrate as half or more of the species pass quickly into extinction. We're in the situation of surgeons in an emergency room who slowed the bleeding of an accident victim to, say, 50%. And we as observers can say, congratulations, the patient will be dead by morning. There's a momentous moral decision confronting us here today. It can be put in the form of a question. What kind of a species, what kind of an entity are we to treat the rest of life so cheaply? What will future generations think of those now alive to make an irreversible decision of this magnitude in such ignorance and so carelessly? The 5 previous such mass extinctions, the last one about 65 million years ago that ended the age of reptiles, variously among them, starting from the end of the Permian, took 5 million to 40 million years to recover by evolution. Does any serious person really believe that we can just let the other 10 million species that exist on this planet or more drain away, and our descendants will somehow, you and yours to follow, and our descendants will somehow be smart enough to take over the planet and ride it like the crew of a spaceship? That later generations will somehow find the way to equilibrate the land, sea, and air in the biosphere, on which we absolutely depend in the absence of most of the natural biosphere that took 3.5 billion years to put together. Most, or many of us at least, here present, understand that only by taking global conservation to a new level can the hemorrhaging of species be brought down to anywhere near the original baseline rate, which in pre-human times was 1 species extinction per 1 million to 10 million, somewhere in that range, of species a year. Loss of natural habitat is the primary cause of biodiversity extinction. To remind you, ecosystems composed of species prescribed by genes, all of it. Only by the preservation of much more natural habitat than hitherto envisioned can extinction be brought close to a sustainable level, and at least give humanity time to put its act together in this continuing destruction of the natural world. The number of species that can persist in a habitat, I'll remind you, increases somewhere between the 3rd and 5th root of the area of the habitat, in most cases close to the 4th root. At the 4th root, a 90% loss in area, which is frequent in present-day practice and a common feature of many of the most species-rich places in the world, from Madagascar to New Caledonia to the Philippines, and on and on. And there will be, therefore, even when we set off just that amount, an automatic drop over time to half the species or more. At the present time, about 15% of the global land surface and 3% of the global ocean surface are protected in nature reserves. That varies by 1 or 2 according to estimates, but this is the most authoritative I've given you, I believe authoritative. 15 protected on the global land surface, 3% on the global ocean surface. Not only will most of these reserves continue to suffer automatic diminishment of their faunas and floras unless each species in turn is attended to, but extinction will accelerate overall as the remaining unprotected wildlands and marine habitats, especially coral reefs, shrink due to human activity. The only way to save the rest of life, if we want to save the rest of life, and heaven to Betsy we do, the only way is to increase the area of protected and inviolable habitat around the world to a safe level. What is that safe level? My field is biogeography, and this is subjective, but I think it can be argued. I believe that all the signs of current trends in evolution, of extinction and duration of species lives, all the signs show that a safe level can be managed with a stabilized global population of about 10 billion people, more about that in a moment, is at about half the Earth's land surface plus half the surface of the sea. Now, before you start making a list of why that can't be done, that half can't be set aside for the other 10 million or so species sharing the planet with us, let me explain to you why I believe it most certainly can be done if enough people wish to do it. Think of humanity in this century, if you will, as passing through a bottleneck of overpopulation and environmental destruction. At the other end, if we pass through safely, and if we take most of the rest of Earth's surviving life forms with us, human existence, and this is not blue sky, I believe it, human existence could be a paradise compared to today, and the long geological lifespan of our species, even a kind of immortality, could be ensured, again, if we, that is people everywhere, wish it to be so. The reason for using the metaphor of a bottleneck instead of a precipice, which is the usual metaphor, is that four unintended consequences of human behavior provide for the rest of life, so to speak, helping us to thread the bottleneck, find our way through the bottleneck. The first unintended consequence is the dramatic drop in fertility to at or below zero population growth. Whenever women gain a modicum of social and economic independence. Now, this is not just a liberal Harvard professor talking about women's rights, and so on, although I happen to be. But again, this is what is happening around the world. Population growth is slowing worldwide, and it's been predicted most recently by the United Nations Population Program, destined in the present trend to approach stability, and I would add maybe then begin to decline somewhere between 9.6 billion and 12.3 billion by the end of the century. This assumes, and I think reasonably assumes, that the peoples of sub-Saharan Africa are going to pass through the demographic transition and drop to lower fertility rates consistent with the rest of the world. The second unintended consequence I wish to call to your attention is, well, I don't need it because you know, but let's think about it, that's what this means for a half-Earth solution. The second unintended consequence is the growing abandonment of rural and mostly primitively agricultural economies by the implosion of people into cities, freeing land for both additional reserves and for better agriculture and the conservation of natural environments by restoration. It's worth noting also that the current daily production of food globally is 2,800 calories per person per day. I cite this with confidence because it is cited, for example, in the food issue of the National Geographic. And the National Geographic, I know from having written an article, does not let go of you until they check you, they check everybody that's ever written on the subject, and they worry about it. And this is certainly a good piece of news, if correct. 28 calories already, much more, you know, in fine definition of what is consumed by an adult male at the present time. So the problem is therefore not really food production, but transport of food and the poor quality of the artisanal agriculture. We can fix that. The present day agriculture is still basically, around the world, Neolithic. And we could spend an entire session on that alone, with a lot of wriggle room. There are ways, particularly aided by the digital revolution, of greatly increasing, and dry land agriculture and so on, to immensely improve the output, at least enough to accommodate the coming 40% or so anticipated population growth. The third unintended consequence is the reduction of the human ecological footprint by the evolution of the economy itself. The ecological footprint, to remind you, is the amount of space required for all the needs of each person on average. Statements such that the planet, that we have heard, the planet can safely support only 2 to 3 billion people, and we're so far beyond that, it's not even worth considering. But statements like that overlook the circumstance that the global economy is evolving and during the digital and because of the digital revolution at a fast rate. And the trend is overwhelmingly toward manufacture of products that use less material and energy. In the modern economy, that is one of the necessary routes to the increase of productivity. They require these products less to use and repair. Information technology, I scarcely need to remind you, is improving at warp speed. The result is a shrinkage of the ecological footprint. There is no reason to believe that as we climb to this peak in population, that productivity is going to rise, and that it's going to arise in terms of what's called extensive economic growth as opposed to intensive. We are moving rapidly toward intensive growth. We very much need, that is, concentration on just what I said, the effectiveness and efficiency and the cost of the product. We very much need an analysis of that trend and its impact. If economists have thought of analyzing this effect and its meaning for the environment, instead of stumbling around in their fever swamp parameters of the early 21st century, I have not seen an effort like that. And since Nobel Prizes are given so swiftly and readily to economists, I say they should do so forthwith. The fourth unintended consequence is the easing of demand on the natural environment inherent in the evolutionary shift just mentioned from an extensive economy to an intensive economy, one that focuses, for example, in the manner of Moore's law, in innovation and improvements of products instead of acquisition of new and better projects, expanding physical development and promoting capital growth based on land acquisition. Humanity may well be shifting toward a non-growth economy. Just that has been recommended, foreseen and recommended by most of the national academies of science of the world. Focusing on a quality of life instead of capital and economic power as the premier measures of success. And I think that is one of the, not collateral, but certainly causative changes that should be encouraged or just celebrated, really, in connection with the whole issue of parks and space and land acreage and the saving of the living world. And this brings me finally then to the focal issue of the conference. Inevitably, biodiversity and ecosystem science, still pitifully neglected in the academy, in the universities, will move toward parity. I guarantee you this. That's going to move toward parity with molecular and cell biology and brain science among the biological disciplines. Now it is starving. Tomorrow it will be seen as the great scientific, technological, and intellectual challenge that it presents us. They will have equal challenges. They will be seen to have equal importance to our daily lives. And as this expansion occurs into, finally, the living part of the environment, and not shrugging just the physical part, national parks and other reserves are going to be logical centers for fundamental research. The increase in the number and the size of national parks, and parks with smaller political units, is everywhere something that really has to be promoted for the future of humanity. These parks are our ready-made laboratories in which the results have often been laid out so that we don't have to disturb them in any manner. They will also be among the best places to introduce students at all levels to science, pro-science, being pro-science. We already know that that's the case for parks and geology and earth chemistry and water system studies. Soon it will also be more obviously true for studies of the living environment. Students and teachers alike are going to have the advantage of immediate hands-on science at all levels, and where even at the most elementary level, all are soon caught up in making original discoveries of citizen science. After 42 years of teaching experience at Harvard, that's the one on the East Coast, I believe that natural ecosystems are by far the most open and effective way to enter science education and to give it that boost. And not coincidentally, to conclude, we need that knowledge now, desperately, to save the rest of life. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor Wilson. I felt like I was back in class again. Let's talk about some of the interesting issues that you've raised. And I think one of them you alluded to when we got started was the attention focused in our society right now is on climate change. not biodiversity loss. And you spoke about this. Tell me what you think needs to be done to change that.
What obviously needs to be done is that we need more, not just larger parks and more of them, but we need them connected. There's a movement that is taking place in the conservation community globally. Here it is the Wilderness Society and the Wildlands Association, I hope I hadn't got the name wrong, that is promoting the idea not only of larger parks, but also of joining them to make corridors. And I think one of the things that we could accomplish in this country at the present time is what I like to call boxing America. We have already often discussed, and it's been mapped very well, Y2, Yukon to Yellowstone corridor. That can be extended to the Rockies, to the mountains of southern Arizona, to the Sierra Madre Occidental, and then on down. It can then be also cross the taiga, the great coniferous wilderness area, across through Canada. That could be achieved. And then down through areas that are surprisingly sparsely occupied by people to the Adirondacks, and continue on down the Appalachian to Appalachia to the end of that. And then we have a park, we have a corridor already mostly put together through the length of Florida from the Everglades to Okefenokee. And I've been very actively concerned in what is building rapidly a corridor that goes from that, close to that, Tallahassee, all the way to Mississippi, Box America. And then as the climate changes, dries, heats, so on, that allows species of plants and animals to migrate, that is, to breed and expand their population and remain in existence. That should be a worldwide way of planning expansion of land.
So what would you see the role of the U.S. National Park Service then, sort of in that plan and in your plan to reach a 50% goal?
More, bigger, taking central place in America's strategic planning, right alongside defense.
Yeah. Great. There's been a growing recognition of the potential of working landscapes to conserve biodiversity. Do working landscapes contribute to your acreage goals that you need to achieve the 50%?
I think it's not just a stupid, but a dangerous way of looking at it. Okay. I think those who believe in it can now applaud. But the thing is that what kind of landscapes have we got now? If they're not working landscapes, well, they're not working landscapes. Are they lazy landscapes? This is an indication of a wrong-headed and quite dangerous worldview that somehow our national parks, our park systems, our reserves should be evaluated in terms of their importance for humanity. And if you can't get some product out of them, without extinguishing birds, then at least you would be able to measure their value by the aesthetic and the psychological benefits that people have having them there. That's completely wrong. You've got to, we don't even know what's there for the most part to start with. We really need to have an ethic that recognizes the importance of the natural world in its own right, at least until such time we can begin to half understand it. where it came from and what it all means. This is unmitigated arrogance to speak of that. And I've noticed that people who've written most prominently on this worldview, journalists like Emma Maris, unfortunately the present science advisor of the Nature Conservancy, Peter Kariva, and others are pushing this, are also those with the least experience in studying ecosystems and species and other biodiversity. And I'm reminded, I'm sorry for the heat I'm putting into this, but this is something, this is something that should be countered immediately because it's dangerous. And I would like to quote in that end Humboldt, Alexander Humboldt, who had some kind of resistance of this sort 200 years ago. And he said, the most dangerous worldview is the worldview of those who have not viewed the world.
He viewed the world, didn't he? Humboldt, he went everywhere. That's fantastic. Does that mean then that we have to have areas sort of devoid of people to make this goal work for you? Protected areas devoid of people, without people living in them?
Oh, of course not. I think that's a misconception. It might be promoted by, may they soon count among the extinct species, the new conservationists, that, this means we're going to clear everybody out, and not let people in and so on. Not in the least. There are indigenous people. There are people who have occupied the areas that might be included in the expanded parks, who get easements in their families, as was done for the Smoky Mountain, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. It is just that the land that is conserved in a way that the fauna and the flora at least is protected and allowed to evolve and maintain whatever equilibrium it had prior to occupation.
I have a question here from the audience. Do you believe classical natural history is on the decline? And if so, what can be done about it?
It's been on the decline ever since the molecular evolution, which was, of course, the golden age. Let's say that frankly. But I remember one day that my arch rival as assistant professors at Harvard in the 50s when Jim Watson came, and I remember the time I suggested that no ecologist had been thought of, to add to the faculty, and I said, well, so-and-so is over in this graduate school of design, might be given a courtesy or associate membership in this department, and Jim, who's a good friend of mine now, but at any rate, he said, are you out of your mind? And I said, what do you mean out of my mind? And he said, anybody that would suggest bringing an ecologist to a biology department must be out of their mind. Well, that was the attitude of so many when we saw the birth of the great developments in molecular, then cell, then developmental, then neurobiological or brain science. But now we have to understand that great intellectual challenges concerning, for example, the organization of ecosystems out of all that infinitude of biological specificity that occurs in the biodiversity. All that is one of the great challenges of modern science. And that was the point I'm trying to make, that we are going to see a rebirth then of what I like to call scientific natural history. And I want to see, furthermore, eventually a reinstatement of the logos, the ologies. I want to see at places like Berkeley and Harvard and so on, a return of herpetology and ichthyology and entomology and so on as full departments, as majors, in which the students enter to study the biodiversity and just bring in the armamentarium of modern biology to enrich their studies, but whose central interest is that group. I want to see people who are students and fellow professionals, biologists, who's in love with the group they have, that they're studying. They want to know everything about it, and they want to make discoveries based upon it. And that's what we need desperately, and that will reverse. I think that will happen. Maybe the ologies won't come back, they should. But we shouldn't be justifying studies on biodiversity by saying, oh, they add a lot to our understanding of evolutionary biology or developmental biology and so on. That's pathetic. That's a beggar's recommendation. We need to make vertebrate zoology and ornithology and so on equal in emphasis, say, to neurobiology.
Yeah, thank you. We're lucky here. We've managed to maintain and conserve those ology courses.
You're like one of these parks, big parks with a lot of what we call relic species. But now
Present company excluded, right?
Yeah, but now we want to see them grow and flourish and speciate and come back.
There you go. Lineages you don't want to lose, that's right. So thinking about losing lineages, some scientists have advocated triage, or letting some species perish if the cost of conserving them would be better spent maximizing the benefits for more numbers of species. Do you think triage is necessary for conservation of biodiversity to be ultimately successful?
Wait a minute, would you repeat that? I didn't quite get
okay,
the
so
gist of it.
Some scientists have advocated letting some species perish in order to put our best economic benefit by putting the funds into other species that we could triage.
That's ridiculous. I mean, that tends to come. I know you didn't say it as your opinion, but the idea that that we can have some knuckleheaded engineer of biology come in and look over the endangered species and said, well, we're just going to have to let that one go. We can't spend $1 million to bring back that warbler or so on, as we have done under the Endangered Species Act. But we can bring them back. It's not that expensive, and it also is synergistic as you start to implement larger reserves, better knowledge, the techniques generally of sustaining ecosystems. This will become less expensive, just like everything else. But this idea that you just mentioned, that we have a triage, is that some species are just destined to die, their time has come, that's basically it. So why should we be spending taxpayers' dollars trying to save some species that's going to die anyway? That is absolute nonsense. The reason is that a species becomes rare and extinct, usually because its support system in the natural environment or a part of a natural environment is taken away, or species have been allowed to come in that are invasive, that are pressing it out. Members of the species are not old and senile and decrepit, but quite the contrary. The young there are just as vital and reproductive and so on, unless they get too small, so there's too much inbreeding, but even that you can fix it. And that's it. Okay, I'll just sum it up because we're running out of time. Save them all.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some questions I've gotten online about curiosity and engaging people in our parks. How can the national parks best shape biological curiosity for future generations of Americans?
Well, that's precisely relevant to what we're here for. at this meeting. We're talking about the idea that it seems to me to be gaining momentum, that without undue disturbance, we can have research and educational centers within a park. When students are brought in contact in the rich environment which they are innately prone to be interested in to start with, and allowed to learn and also do research of their own very promptly, so helping in the search of a rare species, helping identify or collect forms for identification and so on, they're engaged and it's much more likely to move directly in to science.
So in your own life, you've spoken about how your childhood curiosity drove you as a biologist. Are national parks and wilderness necessary to inspire that awe of nature? Can we find it in smaller places?
Just woods. I grew up substantially in the sight of what we hope to be, those of us who've been promoting it and hoping to see it reality. I grew up in that area of the richest part of the United States per unit area, and delighted to collect all sorts of insects, including butterflies. When I was a little kid, I was called by my colleagues Bugs Wilson. And then I went into a snake phase. 40 species of snakes in the central Gulf Plain. And I was catching them. I even took a strike by a rattlesnake on my left finger. And I was then called Snake Wilson.
How'd your parents feel about that?
I lucked out by having parents who didn't question me too closely when I went out the door. And we could have a whole nother hour on the best way to raise children and vis-a-vis, the natural world and letting kids explore and find things on their own.
Yeah.
It's a very stimulating kind of environment for kids.
It is. And we are starting to come to the end of our time together. Before we let you leave the stage, I wanted to present something to you. You haven't been to Berkeley for a while, and I'm sure you don't have one of these. You need a cow hat.
Wonderful.
This one doesn't have a bear on it, but it has a pine tree, and I think you'll be able to use that when you're out next time in Madagascar.
I will.
Very good. Thank you so much, Professor Wilson. Well, the next person that I have to introduce really has the hardest job of this entire summit. He has to come after E.O. Wilson. And I was able to do that because he is an old friend of mine. Ernesto Enkerlin Hofleitch is a leading Mexican conservationist, environmentalist, and researcher. He's a professor at Monterrey Tech and is also the chair of the IUCN World Commission of Protected Areas. But perhaps most significantly, Ernesto is now a cow parent with a daughter doing graduate work in the Goldman School of Public Policy. Ernesto and I date back to the days when we both began studying tropical parrots. But he was called from the field probably about 15 years ago to lead the Mexican National Commission on Protected Areas, where he made tremendous gains for conservation. And Mexico being a very important area where the mixing of tropical and temperate faunas come together, his work has had great impacts. But today I asked Ernesto to put on his IUCN hat and to use his recent experience leading the World Parks Congress Summit in Sydney to tell us about what that experience was like in his talk, The Role of Parks and Protected Areas as Global Contributors to Earth Stewardship and Sustainability. Ernesto, welcome.
May I have the first slide, or can I work it from here? Oh, here it is.
Should do it, and
Okay.
this will let you point to forward. There you go. We hope. Maybe pick it up a little higher so it doesn't. Getting that one to go forward here. We have no slides. We don't have your slides. Do you have them somewhere? We don't seem to have your slides in the presentation. Maybe it's slides. All right. You start talking without your slides.
Okay, that's fine.
Get them set.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be here. And as Stephen was saying, it's a little bit of things coming together here in California. I had no idea my daughter would be going to school here when I put this mark on my calendar. But there's something else, and that's that when I was about 16 or 17, I got this book. And it was written by Starker Leopold. It's called The Wildlife of Mexico. And I literally slept with that book under my pillow. And it was written the year I was born. And then the revised edition came in 1972 when the Stockholm Conference took place in Sweden. So it's a long way. And today I want to speak to you a little bit about the importance of protected areas on a global scale. I've also adhered for many years to Nature Needs Half, La Mitad para la Naturaleza, which is what Dr. Wilson just talked about. And we need half of nature because people need nature, not because nature needs people. And we have the best tool, which are protected areas in general. Parks are perhaps the best known protected areas. The U.S. has had a very important role in the world to make sure that protected areas and parks become part of public policy. And I believe that the U.S. can continue to have that role. But in the end, it's a global engagement. And we need to have all the world on board. And I think it was very appropriate that we started off in the International House yesterday, and that we're here in an international hub of young leaders from around the world, and that this is really a unique opportunity to take the message that we need more protected areas in the future. So should I wait for the slides, or will the okay, whenever they come up, I'll just move ahead and I'll just start with the presentation without slides. Maybe it's even better. At any rate, protected areas have grown tremendously over the last, especially over the last 25 years. And they have also grown a lot outside of the usual places where they had been established. The original protected area systems were mostly in temperate-based and wealthy nations. Protected areas were seen as a luxury that poorer nations could not afford. And they were also mostly terrestrial. Today we see that protected areas are recognized not only as a way to achieve conservation objectives, but as a way to achieve societal objectives such as poverty alleviation, disaster risk reduction, which is becoming increasingly important as we see climate change literally changing a lot of the way things happen. Insurance companies now worry about climate change, and when insurance companies worry about climate change, you know that there's a problem. But the biggest problem of climate change for biodiversity already arrived before the actual climate change. And that's a lot of the money that was available for biodiversity conservation was drained around the world to address climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. But how do we get that money back? Well, we get that money back by using protected areas as natural solutions for climate change, adaptation, mitigation. The first thing we need to do is to mitigate. That's a more ethical thing to do. We will need to adapt because climate change is going to create a series of things that, so I got my slides finally. Yes, good. Okay. So we will need to adapt eventually, but we should be investing as much as we can in mitigation. Mitigation is the way to do it, and adaptation is sort of like the selfish approach. So we need to be investing a lot in mitigation, and in time we will need to spend in adaptation. But one of the best ways to do it is, so I'm going to go ahead on one of the best ways to do it is to invest in conservation. This is just a rundown of what I will be speaking about. So I'm going to be moving to the protected planet and contributions to protected areas. I'll skip the stressors and overshooting because Dr. Wilson already touched on several of them. And you probably already are well versed in this. So this is what it looks like right now. This is our protected planet. We have 13.5% of the planet protected. And if we include indigenous and community conserved protected areas and territories, which are really it's a huge contribution, and it's really something that has been done for centuries. I know that America likes to think that national parks are a great idea, and it is. But I think it's a great idea mainly because you've put a great idea to practice. Anyone can have a great idea, but the real thing is to make innovation is about making great ideas come into fruition. So in that sense, I think it is probably America's great or one of America's greatest ideas. But we have the ICCAs, which have been there for generations and generations, and we're just discovering that it's a huge potential that we can tap on. This is the tremendous growth of protected areas around the world. But are these protected areas being effective? Are they really conserving biodiversity? Well, we just heard that we're losing biodiversity at about 1,000 times as faster than the background extinction rate. So what's wrong? Are protected areas not working? No, protected areas are working, because if we didn't have protected areas, we would be even much worse off. So we need protected areas, we need more protected areas, and they are conserving biodiversity. They can be hugely improved because they are not necessarily as effective as they could. I have a problem when we talk about protected areas being poorly managed, because being poorly managed sometimes means that maybe the managers are not doing the right job. When we speak about protected areas being poorly managed, what we're saying is that they're poorly resourced, that we're not giving them the priority they need in government and in society. So what we need to do is to get much more resources to protect areas, and then their job will be much, much better done. So this is a world coverage as it looked in the previous Protected Planet report 4 years ago. And now we have a much better map because also, fortunately, technology is advancing. In this map, it looks like Europe is all protected because the pixel size reflects even a tiny protected area will be 1 pixel in size. But with new technology, now we can really do a better job, and this map really shows the exact dimension. But it's grown a lot only in the last 4 years. So this looks great, but still not enough. We need much more conservation areas. Now, we need also good landscapes around protected areas, because protected areas, you cannot count the protected area friendly landscapes as protected areas, but having them will make protected areas much more effective. So it's very important to know that we do need to intervene the broader and larger landscape, not to count them in our protected area numbers, but to make sure that protected areas really do the job they need to do. So this is a close-up of my own country. And I wanted to show this not only because, of course, California shows up very well here, and the U.S. shows up regularly well. But look at the Amazonia, Brazil, in South America. When we say that we want 17% of the terrestrial ecosystems in the world protected, that's what we signed an agreement on, all countries of the world did. What does that mean for Amazonia, where they already have they already have 50% protected? So we have to understand global numbers as averages. And if we have something like the Amazon, which is so important, protected 50 or more than 50%, well, let's keep going for more. And if we have something that's right now not even represented, let's try to get it to 17%. So we need to understand these as ways in which science is turned into policy. There is no evidence that 17% is scientifically the amount of protected areas we need, but that's the current agreement by the countries of the world to achieve. So when you want to have an effective policy, you put reachable goals. If we go to politicians and tell them that we need 50%, they'll just brush you off. But if you tell them, hey, you have 13, why don't you achieve 17? They say, hey, okay, we can do that. So conservation needs to be a stepwise process, and we always need to give each one the ability to reach a particular goal and a particular milestone. So these types of negotiations are very important, and we need to understand them as global targets, and each country needs to comply with that global target according to their own realities. So I'm going to move very, very fast. Let's see how I'm doing. Okay. I'm going to be moving faster now. But the important thing is that the planet is protected, but it needs more protection, and protected areas are a great idea. Now, science gives us the things that need to be done. But then you have to turn the science into policy of what can be done. I'm going to run through these slides really quickly because they're an example from Mexico of really good science done, by the way, by an Argentinian Mexican ecologist who's currently the director of the UC Mexus program here in California, Ezequiel Escurra, a very dear friend of mine, and WWF Mexico. These are Marismas Nacionales, one of our nicest protected areas. And this should be a World Heritage Site, according to me, because this is one of the few places in the world where you can see how the land is moving into the ocean. And this is studies which were done in California also, by the way. So this is the Marismas Nacionales from the air, and you have the Rio San Pedro. Now it's working. Here you have the Rio San Pedro, which is targeted for damming soon. So this group of scientists did some work. This is the original way that the water flow worked in this region, and then we started damming the river, not San Pedro, another river, because we needed electricity, and supposedly hydropower is clean power, blah blah. Okay, so we did that, and so we muted the hydrological cycle, so it's totally muted after the first dam, and it's even more muted after the second and the third dam. So we really ruined the siltation process that brings silt from the mountains and constructs land on the shore. And I'm gonna pass these really fast. This is 1986. And you're going to see how we're losing our country. So we're making Mexico smaller thanks to our great ideas of putting dams for electricity. So this is how it moved. So it's 93. You start to see 95 is when the dam was put in, the first one. So there you see a slight change. 97, larger change there. You already see the coastline receded somewhat. Here it's really remarkable, the amount of loss of coastline. 2002, 2006, 2007 when a new dam was put in, 2013, okay? So imagine that we're losing part of our country and without even fighting a war, like when we lost California in 160 years ago, we sold it. It was a bargain, but anyhow. So this is how it's looking now. So we've lost 1.5 kilometers, so 1,500 meters of coastline through that, okay? So now we'll see it, let's see if it, so amazing. So this is what science tells us. But, and then, there it is. 1.5 is the place where we lost more, but on the average it's 1.1. So this is the other place where the current, where the San Pedro is, and here we haven't lost anything. But, you know, the Comisión Federal de Electricidad is not convinced. So up to now, the dam is approved to be installed. And I just want to bring that up because science needs to be turned into action. Otherwise, our heart beats and we feel great. But if science is not turned into action, then we're in the same place that before the science was out. So science needs to be converted into policy, it needs to be converted into decisions, it needs to be converted into action. So in the CBD, we decided that we were gonna have representative systems of protected areas around the world. That's what the science tells us. So the science tells us that we need them, especially of particular importance for biodiversity, called KBAs, which is something we're working on in the IUCN, ecologically representative, effectively and equitably managed, which means that respecting human rights, etc., well-connected systems of protected areas, other effective area-based conservation measures, because, I mean, we love national parks, but we need more things besides national parks, and integrate into the wider landscape and seascape, as I mentioned. So, but for politicians, they only understand this part, okay? And they only commit to this part. And we need to work to get the rest out of them. And that's the important challenge we have before us from now until 2020, when we're gonna sort of like do a balance of where we are in terms of the decade of biodiversity ending in 2020. And these are some of the targets that we need. To me, I'm just gonna go to the first target because I think it's the most important one, even though I'm not a communicator, but we need to build awareness. Conservationists are not gonna save the world. The world needs to save itself. So we need to make the rest of the world aware. Otherwise, we're just like a small friction in the way to the 50% being dead tomorrow morning type thing. So we need to make the rest of the world aware. And I think one of the most important things we can do as scientists, as students, as leaders, is to recruit more people to the cause of conservation. Because it is the world that will save itself and not conservation saving the world. So with that, how many more minutes do I have? Okay, good. So I'm gonna go to the end of an analysis I did for the George Rice Society meeting, which is gonna take place here in California next week, only 8 years ago. But I think these are still valid. These are the 10 points where I think we should focus our attention for the years to come. One is relevancy, maintaining protected areas' relevance in public policy. Second is representation, making sure we have all the ecosystems and all the species involved. Connectivity and permeability, which I think maybe is more important, but we understand connectivity better. But connectivity and permeability, friendly landscapes for conservation. Poverty reduction, we're not going to get out of this mess if we don't attune to a lot of the disparities in society. Invasive species, a big problem all over the place. Value and values, not only monetary value, but really the values we assigned to protected areas and to biodiversity. Climate change. It's here, it's already taking our money, but it's going to take more away from us, and we need to be ready. Shifting priorities, and we see that in governments the whole time. Changing demographics, we're not getting wiser, but we're getting older, but then we're having a lot of urbanites, and urbanites don't understand nature. To them, a field of corn is the same as a forest with biodiversity. And then marine be a national jurisdiction. The seas belong to the whole world. The whole world needs to take care of the seas. So we need to build resilience. We need to hope and prepare for adaptation, and we need to make hard choices. When I speak about triage, I don't speak about triage in a scientific sense. I think we should all go for all the marbles as scientists. But when you are doing policy, you're going to have to be able to reach compromises. And nobody wants to make compromises. So don't make compromises as a scientist or as a leader or as a young person. But when policy comes in the picture, there will be triage. So I will leave it at that. And if there's questions, I'll take the questions. Lastly, I would like to call your attention, just try to check on a global carbon tax that we're promoting, because fossil fuels are part of the problem we need to address. It's not only making protected areas work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ernesto. We'll go sit down over here. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ernesto, and thanks for pioneering through our first mishap today. Can I ask you, one of the things that you mentioned was issues and sort of trade-offs in the effective management of reserves and thinking also about new reserves. How do you think finances should be invested in that way? We have some reserves that we feel like are not getting financially supported to make their goals. At the same time, we know we need to have a greater area of the earth and the seas protected.
Yeah, well, as a parent, I was very responsible because I only had 2 kids. But when it comes to protected areas, let's get all that you can, every time you can, and as large as you can. So you should never let go an opportunity to create a new protected area. I was very criticized because in the beginning we didn't have any money, and we were creating new protected areas, in this case in Mexico. But the money came later. So you do it with a little bit of hope and a little bit of insanity, but never when everything is ripe, when a community, an indigenous community or a mayor or a governor comes and says that they want to create a new protected area, and everything is laid out on the table, you don't say, oh no, it's, your protected area is priority number 12, so why don't you come like in 2 years? So you can't do that. So you go for everything every time you can, as best as you can. And even if they are not what they call hard protected areas, I mean, you can harden them with time, but let's get them while you can.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. What lessons from IUCN might assist the National Park Service in thinking about resolving conflicts between local and national land use goals, between local people and their needs to have working livelihoods around protected areas, and sometimes even in them, and national goals of protection?
Yeah, the thing is that there's a false dichotomy between people's livelihood and people's well-being and conservation. The directly benefited people, more directly benefited people, are the ones living close to the land. But many of us don't understand that relationship, that deep relationship of people with the land, ranchers with the land. Sometimes we think of ranchers as bad stewards. They have bad incentives, but given the right incentive, any land steward will do the right thing for the land and for conservation. So we need to change those dichotomies, and I think that the best way to do conservation is with the local people. So don't impose, and always give them an incentive. We're benefiting, so let's give them an incentive back.
That's great advice, I think. I wondered, sort of thinking along that ways, what kind of lessons from IUCN about co-management? Co-management is an an important issue in international resources. What kind of lessons from IUCN experiences that you've had could you think could be applicable to our U.S. national parks in that way and protected areas?
Yeah, not all countries have the level of government that you have in the U.S. There's many states that are even considered failed states. So you always need to have someone take care of protected areas. Where you have states which are very weak, sometimes it's better to do it with civil society, with local organizations, and with co-management arrangements. The indigenous, the ICCAs are one of the best things coming in for conservation over the next decade. We're going to be able to incorporate lots and lots of more land. A lot of the times the things between that we don't like about ICCAs are just misunderstandings, because really the priority setting can be harmonized in a big way. So I believe that co-management has to be there. Now we also need governments to be involved. It's not the government's duty is to look for the good of the people, and protected areas are good for the people. So governments should be involved also. So we need to insist in governments taking on their role, but together with society, and co-management is an ideal situation of having society and government participate in stewards of the land.
Okay. Well, thinking about needs and goals, looking out at this group, I think they need some coffee. So I'm going to proclaim this part of the summit done, and thank you very much, Ernesto, for a great talk. See you in 15 minutes.